next to your fire.
Hi, my name is Raquel, and I've been blowing glass since freshman year, and now I'm a college-bound senior. I started blowing glass in Andover, Massachusetts with a wonderful lady named Sandy Dukeshire, and now I work at Barron Glassworks in Ypsilanti with a woman named Annette Barron. The thing about glass blowing is that when I tell people what I do, they kind of get this weird look on their face because they're not really sure what it is. So why don't I give you a more concrete idea of what I do?
Light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. The time to hesitate is through. No time to wallow in the mire.
Now that you have an idea about what it actually means to blow glass, I'd like to talk about my senior project. When Mrs. Seitz announced that we could do a project on anything we wanted, I immediately thought of doing a glass tutorial video that would dispel some of the ignorance about glass blowing. So I soon embarked on my journey making a glass tutorial video as well as a supplemental research paper on the history of glass blowing.
Walking in a fire.
Before I was able to start making my video, I had to lay out a game plan. This game plan began with writing a research paper. First, I had to do some research. So I went to the library, took out a few books, and read up on the history of glass blowing. After that, I had to sit down and write myself a script. What I decided to put in the script was very important because I didn't want to leave out any important information. After that, I had to get to shooting. Shooting is probably the most important part because if you don't get good film, then you don't have anything to work with when you start editing your movie, which is the fourth step. Editing was probably the most difficult part of this project for me, but also the most educational. After you're done editing, you have a tutorial video.
But don't play with me.
As I said before, the first step in making my video was some research. So, I went down to the library and checked out a few books on the history of glass blowing.
St. John's Wood.
I took these books home, tried to get as much information as possible out of them, and then set myself to the task of writing a 5-page research paper on the history of blown glass.
Let me stand next to your fire.
After I wrote my research paper on glass, I had to write a script for my tutorial video. Now this was really difficult for me because I had to decide what's the most important things about glass that I would need to teach people in my video. This was a bit of a struggle, but with the help of my teacher Annette Barron, as well as some good glass blowing books, I was able to come up with a very good script.
What would your advice be to a beginner glass blower?
I would say, well, I'd say a lot of things. You've heard a lot of axioms around here. But one thing that I would say is that you will perfect a design by remaking it. You have to be patient. You need to let things go away. You know, if they go off in the wrong direction, you could get angry about it, you could get frustrated. But the best thing to do is to see what the glass is trying to tell you. So go in with a plan, but fly by the seat of your pants. You'll learn more.
The next step in making my video was actually filming. Now this was a bit of a struggle, seeing as the glass blowing studio is a little crowded and it's also very hot and loud. But I recruited my friends to come videotape me for a few days, and I think we got some really good footage.
While I did get some footage, I did encounter some problems while filming. First of all, the studio is crowded and it is unsafe for people to be hovering like a cameraman has to, so some of the shots weren't exactly what they needed to be, but it was impossible for me to do better. Also, the studio is loud, so I couldn't explain as I went, which is optimal in blowing glass. This makes my voiceover explanations more difficult to understand and fragmented. The first time I went in to film, a piece of glass that I was working on exploded, and I was burned seriously enough that I couldn't continue that day. This happened at the beginning of the day, and I had scheduled to film all day. This obviously put a crimp in my plans. Also, it was very difficult for me to plan a time that I could go to the studio and have it to myself. I had to pay for the time I had the studio to myself because a glassblowing studio is a business after all. Also, the technology did not exactly cooperate. Camera's batteries died very soon after charging, and they didn't record sound as well as they should have. Also, all of the people who filmed for me were not exactly experienced in glassblowing, so some of their experience made for some pretty strange shots.
Here I have laid out the most basic tools in a glass blower's toolbox. The Romans were pretty cool cats, but unfortunately all of their progress was lost during a movie. Now you just saw some unedited footage, but that had to be very refined to go into my video. This took hours of editing, which was really stressful and also very frustrating, seeing as I haven't really used iMovie before, but that was definitely the part of this project that I learned the most in, because I had to really struggle to get a really nice result.
Many of the problems that I encountered when editing were a result of my not being very tech savvy and also being a novice with iMovie. This made editing very slow at the beginning. I did end up getting a lot of footage, and it was difficult for me to wade through all of it and decide which takes I wanted to use. Also, deciding on music was harder than I expected it to be, as well as incorporating it into my video. I also had to figure out how to edit out or dim the background noise of the studio because it's very loud and it's difficult to hear me talking in the video in the glass studio. In the end, I did learn how to use iMovie and came out with a beautifully edited video.
Here's a taste of the actual video.
Let me walk you through making a pole ball. The first thing you'll need to do when making a pole ball is gather, which is getting glass out of the furnace. Right now the furnace is really hot and probably really scary, but have no fear. A good steady hand and even turning are all you need to get a perfect gather every time. Make sure you stand behind the door and let someone else hold it for you so you don't get cooked every time you need glass. The next thing you're going to need to do when making a pole ball is marver. Marvering is shaping your glass on the marver. Marvering, like gathering, is mastered through even turning and a light hand. One of the most important things in glassblowing is turning constantly. Because glass is a liquid, it has the tendency to drip off your pipe or punty. See, when I stop turning the glass, it sags off. Like in wheel throwing pottery, you always want your glass to be on center. This will mean that your final product is round and straight, and when you get to blowing, that your walls are even, as well as your heat. By turning constantly at a constant rate, you will keep your glass on center and will produce good glass. This, however, is not as easy as it sounds. It takes lots of practice and determination to perfect your turning. The next skill you will learn when making a pole ball is how to make a jackline. Jacklines are usually used when making a blown piece to separate your pipe from your piece. In this case, we will be using them to make a decorative piece. Use your jacks as if they were your fingers and squeeze down lightly, letting go occasionally to let the heat soak back into the piece.
This project was definitely a learning experience for me. I feel like I learned a lot about how much I know about glassblowing and making the script because I had so much to say and I needed to edit that down, which was a very good feeling, but also intimidating because I'm probably going to not have as much of a chance to blow glass next year. It was also a learning experience in that I learned how to use iMovie through some sweat and tears, but it was definitely a good experience for maybe projects that I'll do in college. I do think that I could have pushed myself a little bit harder, and maybe having done like a series, like maybe releasing a video every few weeks or something, and I think that would have been, I would have had a more measured growth at the end of the project. But I do think that it was a learning experience for me. It was a learning experience for my teacher as well, and it was a whole lot of fun to do.